Good evening. I know we've heard Pastor Phil talk about David's failure. Daryl just came up and did a great job talking about Nathan confronting him. I'm going to do something a little bit different. And I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. And as was just mentioned, I get the opportunity to oversee and serve our counseling center. So I want you to imagine for a second, after Nathan really confronts David, that David goes to see a counselor. And I'm going to be that counselor. So you got to do this with me. So we're going to do 4 counseling sessions in 10 minutes. Are we good? It's what you always wished a counseling session was. I remember when David came to me the first time. Our first session was typical. David wanted to focus on what happened, and he wanted to fix it. It's typical of an alpha leader, especially when he's failed. He'd just been confronted by Nathan. He'd been told that the child would die that Bathsheba had, but the child had not yet been born. He was a mess. What did he talk about? The facts: murder, adultery, not even an affair, just flat out adultery, deceit, failure to lead. And he admitted everything. It was unexpected to me. I'd always thought of David as a good king. I knew there weren't perfect kings, but this was a surprise even to me. You know, David, I appreciate what you've said, but I want to let you know admittance isn't all there is to confession. It's a start, but if you want to find healing, there's more to do. You know, David, the Greeks have a word for truth, aletheia, they've developed. And it means more than facts, David. It means reality, what's real. And for you to find healing, I want to take you on a journey for you to find out what is real in your life and about God. Session 2 was going to be more difficult. We had talked about what David had done, but now we were going to get into the why. David didn't just wake up, commit adultery, take another man's wife, have him killed, one of his military leaders. He didn't just wake up one day and almost commit treason against his own nation. And I remember what Nathan had told him because he had shared it with me, and it was powerful. I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdom of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, now get this, and if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. You know, David, I know there was a time in your life when you were a shepherd and you would have been out there tending flock and you would have been writing poems. You would have looked at the stars and been blown away that God was even mindful of you. You'd have taken this idea of being a shepherd and you'd have started to write lines about how God was your shepherd. And you know, during that season of life, David, I bet God and what he gave you was enough. I bet you remember when Samuel showed up to your father's house. And although your dad didn't call you to the meeting, eventually you would find out that you were the man that God had in mind to rule and be king. You would have never thought of that. And I bet at that time in your life, God and what he had done for you was enough. I could only imagine as a teenager walking down into that valley and confronting a giant, Goliath. When no other man dared to go down, you had the courage. And with God, you killed him, decapitated him, had a trophy. The cheers, you had a cause. I bet at that time, God and what he had done was enough. Eventually, Saul would turn on you and you would run, but God protected you. And it was during that time you learned to trust God and he put a band of men around you. One day you would rule. I bet during that season, God and what he had done for you was enough. Eventually, you would have the kingdom. You would unite the north and the south. You would establish Jerusalem. You would lead military victories. You would have peace. The kingdom would be huge. I bet during at that time, God and what he had done for you was enough. They would write songs about you. They would praise you. And so here's the question, and this gets to the why, David. When did God and what he does for you stop being enough? I want to ask you again, David. When did God and what he has done for you stop being enough? There's another question I've got to ask you, and it's a harder one, David. God entrusted people to you to lead them, to shepherd them, to care for them. When did the people God had given you to lead start being objects in your life? When did they become a means to an end? When did you start looking at them as things to use to serve your flesh and meet your needs? That was a tough one for David. But leaders will have goals and expectations. And it's funny, those will be met by God, and they'll grow. And they're given new dreams and new expectations. Things that maybe they would have never dreamt of when they were young. And they wake up one day with more than they could have imagined that God's done in their life. But it's no longer enough. They begin seeing people as things, not things, as people to shepherd and care for and lead. And then one day they just see them as things to accomplish their own goals. That session was tough for David. We moved on to session 3. And he sat down and I finally said this: we're going to talk today about what you're feeling. Once again, typical alpha male leader, he just wanted to solve the problem. But there was no solving this. Bathsheba would lose a child for a mother, unbelievable pain. She would lose her husband. David would become her husband because without that, who would care for her? But David would be a nightmare to her. Had brought nothing good. It was doubtful the Hittites would ever forgive David for what he had done to Uriah. And his military leaders, would they trust him again? Knowing that he had betrayed them and one of his generals? David couldn't fix this. So once again, I pressed into him to do something difficult. David, I won't do this for you, but I don't want you to talk just about what you did. And I don't just want you to tell me how sorry you are. I want you to tell me how you feel right now. I want you to tell me the emotions that you're processing. He didn't want to do it, but eventually they started coming out. And it was sad. He said he didn't have any joy. He said it was gone, almost like depression. He used these words. He said he felt haunted, that his sin was always before him. He said he felt shame, like God was always looking at the mistake. Despite what Nathan had said, he felt like God's still looking. He felt alone and isolated, banished from God's presence. Hakatan, do you still feel, David, like you did when your dad forgot to summon you when Samuel came? Do you feel that again, like God's forgotten you? He mentioned broken, and I asked him, what kind of brokenness? He said, in my bones, like the very foundation of his life, at his core. Says he feels useless. And the last one is apathetic. He said he didn't really feel like serving. He didn't feel like he should continue. It provided me an opportunity to meet him in the depths of his pain and finally form a connection. It's a tough session, but you don't leave someone there, and that's when you make the transition. And I said, David, now we're gonna fight for perspective. I know how you feel. I know how you hurt. I know how lost you are. But I want you to tell me not just what's real about you. I want you to tell me what's real about God. And I know you're not feeling it now because you're in the darkness. But I want you to go back in your life to when you were in the light. And I want you to remember who God is. And I want you to attach something about who he is to all of those feelings. He brought up God's restoration. He brought up that God's a God of compassion. He reminded me that God was righteous. He remembered again that God is faithful. He shared again that God brings joy. And the last one was this: it is God who redeems. Finally, hope. I asked him to meet one more time. It was session 4. What now? David, do you believe God can use you as he continues to grow his kingdom? I didn't ask if he could give you privilege. I didn't ask how he'd restore you. I'm asking this: can you see a future where God uses you as he sees fit in his kingdom? He told me he could see the glimpse of it. I said, God desires a contrite spirit. No blame, no excuse, no abrogation of consequences. Can you live again for Zion, not your position? And can you live again where God and his presence is enough? He looked at me and he says, do you think anything good can come from this? Could God use my story for his glory to help others understand the consequences of sin, but more importantly, the depths of his grace? And I said, yes, but it'll not be how you control it. It'll be how he sees fit. David, I have one more assignment for you. I know you like writing poems. I'd like for you to write a poem about our sessions and what we've talked about. David asked me if I thought anyone would read it. I said, maybe. David did write a poem about it 3,000 years ago. It is Psalm 51. I'm going to finish tonight, not me reading it to you. It's going to be on the screen, and it's going to loop through. And with everything you've heard tonight, I'm just asking you to take in the poem David wrote and not focus just on his pain, but focus on God and his grace.